Artwork, critiques, Photoshop files, and reference sheets are all available on my Patreon. Female bodybuilding and large muscular women, you've got to love them, and they're certainly going to add a lot of design to your anime and manga characters. So hello there guys and girls, I hope you're doing well. My name's Mikey, welcome back to my room. It's time for another tutorial. I'm just going to be using a super cheap disposable mechanical pencil if you're following along at home, some cheap printer paper, and an extra little shred just so that I can rest my hand on this without rubbing it across my page. And let's take a look at larger female anime and manga characters who are going to be a bit more muscular, Amazonian and hulking, and take a look at the key aspects and basic building blocks to put them together while still actually keeping in mind this slightly effeminate design. There's going to be a few bits with the visual language and the body musculature that keeps things looking like a very large lady instead of a large hulking guy, and much more like the women I tend to follow on Instagram. So what I'm going to do is just start off with the head over here, and I'm going to actually make it relatively small. I will do my best to work quite firmly on the page so that I end up putting down a line which is a little bit thicker and heavier than I do in real life, just so that it picks up on the camera. And I'm going to look at a female large physique just at a slightly lower angle than head height so that they kind of tower over us as well. Now we've done some tutorials about extra large giant ladies. There's a link in the corner of the screen where you can take a look at that, and also some tutorials about the basic building blocks I like to use when putting a character together. But if I go ahead and just start to pop in a rough shoulder line for this character, come down here, get a rough hip line in as well. I'm going to have the torso twist around just a little bit. I'm going to focus on very large basic building block shapes to put this together here, and then I might make the head a little bit larger or a little bit smaller afterwards to help fit that in with the overall head heights and body scaling. Really just kind of, that's going to affect how large the character seems overall in that kind of relationship, head to body. So I've started here with that basic circle. I'm just going to come down with a neckline, and even if you're doing very large hulking female characters, I'm not going to be super thick with that neckline. I'm still going to think mostly about a column that's coming down there and just meeting towards a collarbone area here. And I'm just going to think about the spine line as well, where the weight is just going to maybe curve here a little bit for our character, and then maybe just pop out a little bit further that way in the lumbar region. And then I might just have a very strong leg line here. And what I'm just doing here is thinking about, the overall weight and the overall rhythm of the body flow, and just making sure that that's going to sit quite confidently on the page, just like so. Now, obviously, I like to use lots of ovals for maybe getting in a nice chest of our character, but I'm going to be very generous here, and I'm also going to be very wide, just to kind of really bring out the large nature of a character. We've got that other elliptical kind of egg shape on its side here, which is a little bit flatter at the bottom, rounder at the top. These are really just our guides that we put our structure on top of. And by the way, do excuse me if I try to talk quickly or work fast and a little bit rough, just so that this video doesn't be too long, because there's going to be a few bits we're going to be taking a look at. And I'm just going to think about the front of this surface area coming down here and then tucking right round there as well. And I'm going to pop up to some shoulders. Now, normally we have some small shoulder circles just sitting there doing their job. I'm going to be much more generous. There's a few areas such as the shoulders and the arms and the thighs that you can really pop out with your big, strong anime female characters. But we still tend to go a little bit thinner in the hips. And there's a few key areas like the neckline, which is quite an effeminate sort of central area. And also around the ankles and the wrists, that might still be relatively thin compared to the overall scale, just to give this kind of flow of thicker and thinner, but still kind of have these areas where the hands might not be overly large in this character. They might still be relatively effeminate. Just these little things all tend to register. But anyway, I'm babbling. Let's crack on. Another large shoulder here that's tucked away behind the torso there. And then I'm just going to think about an arm line that's just popping down here. The length of this arm is going to be roughly the equivalent of where the lower ribs are, roughly defined by that kind of oval shape we've put in for the chest. And then I'm just going to have this arm pop in like so. And I'm going to put a little circle here and imagine that there's a hand shape. Maybe that's just a hand tucked down, a fist resting on a hip perhaps. I'm going to keep that very, very vague. We're going to focus on the larger muscles mostly. And then I'll just get an arm popping off down here somewhere. One about there, following that shoulder line down because we're sort of looking up. We'll make that a little bit more clearer in a moment. Let's get a large elbow zone there. One just here. And then this arm's going to go all the way down there. And then might just have another kind of fist shape coming around about here, around about level with the undercarriage of the torso area. So normally we put in these kind of small cylinders and conical shapes to help us define and use as building blocks both the direction of the arm, which kind of angle everything is kind of pointing towards and so on. But with these ones, I'm going to be putting in some very thick cylinders. So to start off here, I'm actually going to guide myself by putting a very light, very kind of bulging, thick, cylindrical shape like that. And again, because these are guides, these are just going to help me map in all the musculature in a minute. So I don't mind if these are overlapping or eating into each other. And again, I'm going to be really generous this time with the forearm as it meets here. And then I'm still going to kind of have this zone here where it's much, much bigger and then sweep down to be a little bit thinner towards the wrist, just like so. And then I might just sort of enlarge in this sphere area here where we've got that joint just so that the elbow's popping out. And then I'm going to come just across here and just think of a very similar thing very quickly for this arm. We are kind of looking up a little bit. So these kind of thick cylinders, we're actually going to see slightly a little bit of the underside there. I'm going to pop another one in here. That forearm shape, I sort of imagine a incomplete egg oval here. And then I just follow that sweep. It goes halfway along before it just gets a little bit thinner as well. Just trying to think about these relatively dominant strong lines. Also across the chest area, I like to map just below the shoulder lines where we might have the boob area coming out. And with larger muscular ladies, they might have a smaller chest in comparison because they've got a lower body fat ratio to really make their muscles look defined and so on. Or maybe they've got an extra generous chest area to really bump up that effeminate edge against all of this big muscle. There's a whole range of ways you can do it with your character design. So just kind of experiment and see what's going on. Now, I quite like, especially when we're looking a bit up, to have a relatively nice solid line that goes from the top of the shoulders here and it just runs down where the collarbone would be, right across that joint to the front of the neck, and then right away to the other shoulder. I'm going to sort of take off a little bit off of the top there. Oh, it's a little bit dirty, that eraser. I do apologize. And just let that sweep down beyond our field of view. And I'm also going to get a little bit more of the neck muscles just coming here, just for traps. Just one down there, just sweeping up there. And I'm doing that just so that I can really enjoy that neckline as well. It's quite a thick, powerful neck, but it's not going to be as wide as the actual head area because that's just going to push it into a very kind of masculine kind of vibe. And it gives us different shape language as well. We end up seeing more of a square, truncated shape here, and that kind of affects your understanding of your characters. Now, because we're looking up into this chest cavity, we've got down the front here, and I'm just going to sweep a curve down here to roughly indicate where we might be having the ribs going. Again, just going to guide us. We don't have to be locked to it. I've got these hips twisted around a bit, so this kind of front area is facing a little bit more off to the right. So I'm just going to get that bucket shape of the hips actually coming around about there. Just like so, and then yeah, popping out around about here. Excellent, and that helps me understand that the abdominal wall is coming from the lower ribs here, just joins to the top there, just as it does around here. We can keep this relatively thinner for female muscle building characters as well. And then if we just have a quick look down the leg here, I'm just going to come about halfway down here and imagine, right, this is where I'm going to have one knee zone. So I'm just putting in a large circle there, something similar over here. Legs always being part of my weakest points. We've got this length down from this hip, but this hip's a little bit lower. So I'm just going to put this circle in a little bit lower as well. Thanks for bearing with if you're following along at home, and thank you so much for watching the tutorial videos right here on youtube.com/Mikey Mega Mega. Click like, click subscribe, etc. to see all the others. Always a pleasure having you guys along, and I will be adding all of this to the tutorials work pack as well in just a moment, but I'll talk about that in a sec. Now, with the legs and the overall curving forms of female characters, I often sort of say things like the hips and thighs are a great way to get all these lovely extra curves and extra mass in, and that's because body fat tends to make up a lot of the sweeping areas of design, which is always great. You can still have these profiles of effeminate, thicker female curving legs, or these kind of large chicken leg bits at the top, but we're also going to add a lot more muscle around the calf at the bottom as well to even it out. And it's down to you how much detail and definition you might want to put into the muscle, but you can still fit it into relatively simple or relatively similar areas, with a little bit of an exception that's worth noting: the bum. Now, if I just think right here, from this large shape that I've given myself, a little bit thicker up here, sweeping down, I'm not going to worry too much about each detail. We're going to keep it simple, but we've got some nice thick muscly legs. I might get a nice bit of bum curve coming up here and just sweeping round to meet into where the hip is on this character. Let's say something like so. What I'm also going to do is I'm just going to leave in a bit of a defining line from here as it goes up to the side of the hip bone. Because when the glutes of the bum kind of squeeze and intense, some people have an area of fat here that kind of makes it all smooth and plain to see. But if you're going to start defining muscle, you might just want to show there's a little bit of side dimple going on the bum as well. And that's a bit more definable if we look a bit more around the side, but we're just kind of having a bit of lean-in observation from this 3/4 view so far. Right, now let's just go down here, and I'm just going to think, right, here's the front of this big meaty leg. We're going over the quadriceps, but I'm not going to split them up right now. Here is our knee area, so the front of that, I imagine a bit of a hinge. It's going to be around about there. And then if I'm coming down the rest of this leg here, like so, I'm really going to keep this joint area relatively thick. And I'm also going to be thinking about halfway down of some very nice thick calves as well, to stop the leg being really too weirdly proportioned into a kind of pin stiletto. You might do that with your giant ladies. With your more muscular Hulk style ladies and bodybuilding form types, we really kind of want to work on all the areas and make this feel like this is all very congruent together. So I've basically got this sort of teardrop or elliptical shape just kind of coming in here, before I then let that meet into just a little bit more of a column down the other end, and then we're going to jump down into the foot. Let's keep this nice and simple because feet are a nightmare, where we come down on the heel, just like so. Top of the foot is going to just be making its way down there. It's kind of facing sideways and a bit towards us as well. And then let's just map over the top to get a feel for what's going on there. One bit there, and then the edge of the toe area kind of towards us, like so. Okay, so just coming up here, we've got some areas which are looking like they're defining shapes and actually finishing things off all around this part of the silhouette. Lovely. Before I come down and just do this leg, let's just come down this side and just think about those shoulders again. I'm going to have that shoulder sweep a little bit here, almost hammering this into a slightly harder line. I'm not going to go too hard on firm straight lines except for a few key areas, because again, even though the muscles are big, I'm going to keep them rounded and feeling nice and effeminate. I'm going to focus on a line here going over the delts of the shoulder as it eats into the brachialis on the side of the arm there. And I might also just come back in to where that meets the chest. I've got some lovely great big bicep here, and I'm going to really just pop that into a point and let that sweep back and into the arm. I've got a similar thing going on with the triceps, where I'm going to be having that situation a little bit thicker up to the top, sweeping in a bit, and then coming right down to the edge of that elbow joint around about here. And then with the forearm, which is kind of in front of us, the brachialis part of the arm, just this kind of outer bit here, can kind of sweep into some of that musculature that makes the forearm area. But again, I'm just going to put in a line that has the kind of just crease of the arm there, and then a big confident sweep of a line going down to the wrist there. And then a similar thing right down here. I'm just going to follow this through, get that kind of elbow placement around about there, And instead of just going straight here where the bone kind of follows, I'm just going to drop down here, get nice and big, sweep back in though, so that wrist isn't too overtly massive. And then again, we can just kind of have that hand shape somewhere. These might be knuckles around about here. Again, I'm going to keep that vague and I'll work on it as I tidy up. Now, don't forget the back side of things. We're going to have the lateral muscles pulling down. So that I'm actually going to have coming behind from our chest cavity area and sweeping in. But I'm sweeping right in and I'm trying to keep things looking relatively slim and thin, even if this is to rather anime proportions around the waist, before I then just come out again, just get the rear side of the hips before we hit the bum zone, coming down on that side. Then over on this side, before I worry about the arms down there, let's just pop down to this leg. Like I said, we're keeping these really confidently big. There's loads going on in the bunched muscles here, but we don't need to define all of them if we don't want to. We can still have really muscly ladies with slightly higher body fat percentages that still cover everything up, just make them really tanky. But if I'm going to have this leg coming out a bit, I still just want to think, right, this is going to be sticking up straight. We're going to have a load of bunched muscles really popping and curving here and coming in from the back around about here. So I'm being really confident with how much space I'm giving that. I can always go a little bit thicker or bring it back down. I can follow the hip line here that's coming down into that before just sweeping that muscle line all the way in. We can just imagine, even if it's just basic bits, that loads of that's happening over the front of the leg and meeting over onto the knee here. And then again, okay, I'm going to get this a little bit thicker. I'm going to allow the hinge of the knee to pop around about there. That's where I'm going to imagine it is. And again, I'm just going to be a little bit confident with another kind of teardrop egg shape coming off quite abruptly for the calf, sweeping back in as it then slowly goes down to the front, right down to the ankle. And then this time, because this leg is kind of sticking out, it's going to be elevated ever so slightly off of the floor if we want to kind of make it look like they're the same length. Again, I do apologize if this is super rough around the edges. So let's get that heel in. Let's get that foot coming down. And then maybe the toe area is coming up. That's still a little bit high off the ground, but I'll give it a little bit of nudging round in just a moment. So we've got this larger lady here. We've got where the abdominal wall is here with all this strong central structure. Lovely. These are our oblique areas on the side here. All of this is our hip zone, which is kind of a front facing flat area where it's not the abdominal wall. Let's tuck this in. And then let's just think about the chest. For this character, I'm going to be relatively generous, and then we'll just jump into a couple others where we'll calm it down a bit. So if we give this a relatively large chest, just to build up with the other large curving areas we've got, I'm just going to think, right, coming down from here, I might sweep a curve that meets all the way around from the back of the neck, but I'm sweeping it all the way in to imagine where the undercurve of the boob is going to be. So I'm going to just imagine that line flowing round, but then I'm actually just going to bring it round about here. Now, you might define a lot of boob shapes for your, and I'm going to be very, very light here because we're looking from the underside, so we're going to get a lot of curve over the top. Now, you might define a lot of boobs if you're anime and manga characters as meeting succinctly right into the socket where the pectoral muscles go as it meets into the shoulder. But with larger ones, you can also just have this flow of flesh tucking in and around. It really depends on, again, the fat content of the boob or the mammaries, I guess. Or how, if you're going to have an artificial boob on a lady who's got very low body fat, then it's going to be a very distinct kind of shape as well, which pops out. And I accept all of them. So let's just erase that line there. Well, just imagine that shape going back up there. And then just like I've got this shoulder line on an angle here, I'm just going to follow that as a tiny bit of a guide really, really quickly, just to let me know the curve of the other boob is going to come somewhere round about here. And I'm just going to let that sweep quite generously again, right off the side there, to fill in a shape around about so. And I'm drawing in the top of the boob line curve again, just to show us that our angle looking upwards towards it the boob curve is disappearing over the top before we actually see it then meet in against the chest. And then with this arm on the other side, I'm just going to keep it relatively simple just for time's sakes. Let's just meet up these larger shapes we've got here. We imagine we've got our big biceps kind of in this area. We're going to chain link down into the inside part of the elbow. What do you call the inside part of your elbow pit? Is that the name? And then wrap round into those muscles of the forearm. Maybe we've got the elbow joint somewhere off the other side there. Generous out, simple in. And then I'm just going to imagine another loose flexing fist shape somewhere down there. And I'm just going to curve that shoulder line a bit further out. And then we can come up, and with this character you can see that I've made her physically very large because the relationship of her body size just to the head in terms of the height is very dynamic. So I could go in and I could just make the head of this character a little bit larger. Just like so, it doesn't have to be much. But if I were to do something like this, very loosely, I've just made the character, although still physically incredibly strong, with these very nice mix of kind of soft edges and then rather straighter lines, this very powerful stance with a wide base. I've just physically scaled them down just by ever so slightly making the head, a little bit larger. Okay, so there's our kind of overall thinking as to what's going on. I think what I'm going to do is just dive into a quick time lapse then, where I'm going to show you something a bit more straight on, but specifically because when I'm done with that, I want to talk about some of the shape language we're using. And then I think it's only fair we take a look at the back as well, if we're going to be really making our characters big and muscly. So I'm just going to hop through that, firm up some of the other line work, and I'll see you right at the end. Hey there guys, and welcome back. So let's take a look at what I was talking about when I was going through the design of this particular example. When it comes to these female anime characters and the areas that we're going to be making larger with them for muscular bodybuilding or Hulk-like characters, you'll notice that I haven't overworked the chest area. I haven't made the pectoral muscles really massive like you might do with a male character, and that allows me to focus on a wider feeling by going across with an even wider shoulder length that I would normally do for a female anime character, just to build up some of that bulk out sideways. And that allows us to really contrast that by swinging it right back in at the hips. And although I like to use a lot of curving shapes in the building blocks process for my characters, I also want to exaggerate that feeling of sharp strength as well. So I actually just went in and I made an hourglass shape by just drawing this big long triangle between the shoulder lines down to the middle of the hip lines. And then I did another flatter triangle coming back up in the other way like that to give me this sort of uneven style of this big kind of hourglass shape. And I've let that kind of hardness of the line help guide the structure that I'm putting together. These hard-edged building block shapes help me understand overall groupings of mass, but they're not something that I have to be beholden to. They're just very useful guides that I'm popping things into. And this little smaller circle here is just denoting where the elbow is probably sitting where we've got these shapes up. Remember, I'm linking the shoulders over and in to the middle of the arms, and then we've got the large muscles coming in on either side like a link of chains. You've probably heard that sort of thing before. And I also just wanted to highlight that over here, you can go in and sure, you can try to break down the different muscles of the leg groups for the quads and all the bits that sit at the front, if you really want to get that definition going. But you also absolutely don't have to for your characters. Here, I've indicated that she's got massive, strong, muscular legs without the need to actually pick out all these individual muscle groups as well. So it's totally down to you. Another thing as well is that when we're getting this hourglass figure, a lot of that is coming from the lateral muscles in the back. So I'm just going to very lightly just shade this part in here, just to show that that's actually right round the back of the character. That's reaching up into the underside of the arm before we've got all the other parts of the rib cage that's coming in. And the kind of curtain of abdominal muscle, this section here, I've actually pinched it in just a little bit here on this effeminate version, just so that it kind of goes in before it pops out a little bit as well. Again, it's just all adding to that slightly more dynamic range of shapes. And what I just wanted to save whilst we were together right now, instead of doing in the time lapse, is that it can be a bit intimidating and difficult to draw boobs onto the muscular characters. So what I'm going to do here is keep it relatively small compared to the scale of the character. And I just start by sweeping in a curving line. I imagine myself starting in the spine up by the top, and I'm going to sweep out and down across the pectoral muscle around about here. And then I'm just going to sweep back up following this kind of rib cage zone area here, just like so. And I'm just going to imagine an oval that's almost a circle, but it's just kind of slightly ovular, popping down off towards the bottom left, around about here as well. And that's where I can imagine I'm going to be placing the boob. You can imagine this curve is sweeping back up and just guided right up towards the spine. And that just helps me understand where I might place something like that as well. But really, this is the underlying thinking, some really big basic building block shapes. And what I just wanted to show you guys over here, and by the way, you'll notice I've got the page up in the top left of the corner, and that's because the names that you're seeing on screen are of my delicious patrons on Patreon. If you do enjoy the fact that I make free drawing tutorials for a living. The only reason why that's possible is some people drop me $1 or more on Patreon, and you for just $1 can pick up this drawing reference sheet along with all of the other ones as well, all together in a big pack as well. So thank you very much for anyone who does that. But just clicking subscribe here on YouTube is also a massive help. Now here, what I was trying to do on the back is really just exemplify, if you're going to make a big muscular woman, one of the key areas you want to build up that back is going to be right along here with the trapezius muscles. And I just wanted to kind of slightly map the surface only to highlight the fact that you can have a character tense up their back and these bad boys right up and around here are going to be bulging. Now I've made these shoulders super crazy large in this particular example, but I keep all of that extra muscle and energy and design at the top of the back. We can still let things slimly pop down here, but all of that extra weight and all of that extra definition, curve and pump is going to be around here. And as such, the muscles might really bunch up and you're going to get thicker lines coming down here where they're kind of casting the center areas of the back into shadow as well. So guys, I hope that's given you a little bit of an idea of what you can be up to when you're drawing your own larger muscular women for anime and manga. I've been eyeballing most of the relationship of the limbs just out of experience, but you can break this down using another tutorial I've got which teaches you very specifically the different proportions of the body depending on what types of characters you're trying to do. But generally, if you're very used to drawing lots of relatively middle of the road slim anime characters that you get in lots of anime, that is great. But if you're trying to design stuff and characters for your own work at home, I recommend mix up the amount of body types, ethnicities, and all sorts of things with your characters just to really push your own skills and give yourself a kind of roster of individuals that are going to be much more interesting to your audience. Thank you so much again, and guys, it's been an absolute age since I last did a tutorial. Really appreciate your patience. We're slowly getting back on track, and I'll see you guys soon for a little bit more. Take care.